Hello friends, welcome to Charm Stories. Please subscribe to this channel and share the stories to others. By the way, to enable subtitles or captions, look for that CSIT icon on the video player. It will be located in the top right corner if subtitles are available. Now let's dive into the story. Chris Benjamin, a 55-year-old billionaire with a keen sense for detail, was on edge. His restaurant empire, the crown jewel of his hard work, had a problem. A small but suspicious amount of cash kept disappearing from the register. It wasn't the money itself that bothered him. He could lose that sum 1,000 times over without feeling it. But the betrayal, the notion that someone from his trusted team might be stealing, dug into him. His thoughts circled around one particular person, Sarima, a quiet waitress who rarely drew attention to herself. She was polite, efficient, and moved through the restaurant almost like a shadow, always blending into the background. Yet, there was a sadness in her gaze, an invisible weight she seemed to carry, which intrigued Chris and set off his instincts. As he watched her from his office, Chris decided he couldn't let this go. After the last customer left, and the restaurant had quieted down, he called out, "Sarima, can you come to my office?" Sarima froze for a moment, her eyes widening slightly, but she nodded and finished wiping down the table. She followed Chris to his office, her steps hesitant. Once inside, Chris closed the door, gestured for her to stand by his desk, and took a seat. His gaze was sharp and unyielding. "There's been some money missing from the register," he said, his tone firm. "I need to know what's going on." Sarima's eyes widened, and she instinctively gripped the strap of her bag. A flash of fear crossed her face, but she met his gaze and nodded quietly. "Let me see your bag," Chris requested, his tone leaving no room for refusal. Sarima hesitated, clutching her bag a little tighter. But after a moment, she handed it to him, her expression tense. Chris began searching through it, just the usual items at first, a wallet, a notebook, some loose change. Then, his fingers brushed against something small tucked into a hidden pocket. He pulled it out, his heart skipping a beat. It was an old photograph, worn around the edges. Chris's breath caught as he stared at the familiar face smiling back at him. It was Felicia, his fiancée who had mysteriously vanished 21 years ago. Seeing her face again, even in an old photo, stirred a storm of emotions, shock, pain, and longing. He looked up at Sarima, his voice strained. "Where did you get this?" Sarima's eyes flickered with confusion and fear. She instinctively reached out as if to grab the photo, but Chris held it away, his gaze unyielding. "Where did you get this?" he repeated, firmer this time. Sarima blinked, her face pale. She stammered, It's my mother. That's a picture of my mom." Chris felt his pulse quicken. He looked at Sarima closely for the first time, really looked at her. The resemblance was undeniable, the same soft eyes, the same delicate features. How had he not seen it before? "Your mother?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Your mother is Felicia?" Sarima nodded slowly, her brows furrowing. "Yes. She passed away when I was little. I never really knew her." "Why?" Chris felt the world spin around him, realization hitting him like a freight train. Sarima wasn't just any employee. She was his daughter, the daughter he never knew existed. The child Felicia must have had after she disappeared. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, a whirlwind of emotions raging within him, anger, guilt, disbelief, and an aching sadness. "Come with me," he said, his voice tight. "We need to talk." Sarima followed him down the narrow hallway, her heart racing, unsure why he seemed so shaken. They reached a small sitting area near the back of the restaurant, a quiet place staff used during breaks. Chris turned to face her, the tension between them thick. "You said the woman in this photo is your mother?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarima nodded. "Yes. That's Felicia. She died when I was really young. I don't have many memories of her." She looked down, biting her lip. Talking about her mother always felt strange, like trying to grasp a fading memory. Chris inhaled sharply, feeling as if he'd been punched in the gut. His thoughts raced. Felicia had died? But if she had a daughter, it meant she'd been pregnant when she disappeared. Pregnant with his child. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing as he struggled to process everything. "You have no idea," he muttered, almost to himself. "No idea what this means." Sarima looked up, clearly confused. "What do you mean? You knew my mother?" Chris stopped pacing and looked at her, raw emotion in his eyes. I didn't just know her, Sarima. I loved her. Felicia and I were supposed to get married. We were engaged. But she vanished one night. Just disappeared. I never heard from her again. Sarima's mouth fell open, shock washing over her face. Wait, you were engaged to my mom? Chris nodded slowly, memories flooding back. Their last argument, the way she had left, the sleepless nights spent wondering where she was and if she was safe. He'd convinced himself she'd left because of their fight, but now, with her daughter standing before him, everything he thought he knew was crumbling. I had no idea, Sarima whispered, her voice shaking. She felt a strange emptiness inside her as pieces of her past shifted, all the gaps in her mother's story suddenly making sense. Felicia must have been running from something or someone. Chris sighed heavily, his gaze falling to the floor. If I'd known Felicia was pregnant, if I'd known about you, he trailed off, struggling to find words for the overwhelming emotions inside him. Sarima stared at him, barely able to wrap her mind around what she was hearing. She had grown up without a father, never asking too many questions because her mother had always seemed guarded. And now, her boss, Chris, was telling her he was her father. She felt a deep ache as if the ground beneath her had shifted. I don't understand, she said, her voice shaky. Why didn't she ever tell me? Why didn't she come back to you? Chris shook his head, his expression pained. I don't know. That's what I've been trying to figure out for years. I thought she left because of me, because of a fight we had. But now I think there was more to it. Sarima sank into a chair, feeling as if her legs might give out. This was too much, too fast. Her mother had always been a mystery, a shadow in the background of her life. Now, suddenly, her father was here, this man she barely knew, telling her he'd been searching for answers all along. Seeing the hurt and confusion on her face, Chris softened his tone and sat down across from her. Look, Sarima, I know this is a lot. But you have to believe me, I didn't know about you. If I had, I never would have let you grow up without knowing the truth. Sarima looked at the floor, her mind spinning. So, what do we do now? She asked softly. Chris leaned back, exhaling slowly. I don't know, he admitted. But I do know one thing. I need to find out what happened to your mother. Why she left, why she kept you a secret. There's more to this story, and we need to figure it out. Sarima looked up, uncertainty in her eyes. How? Where would we even start? Chris's expression hardened with determination. There's only one place to start, the house where Felicia and I lived before she disappeared. I haven't been back there in over 20 years, but maybe there's something there that will give us answers. Sarima hesitated, unsure of how to respond, but a deep, unspoken need to understand the truth tugged at her heart. She nodded slowly. Okay, she said quietly. Let's go. Chris glanced at her, a mixture of relief and determination in his eyes. Good. We'll leave in the morning. The next morning, they set out on a long, silent drive to the old house. The fog hung low over the road, adding an eerie weight to the journey. Sarima sat quietly, her fingers tapping against the car door, stealing glances at Chris, who gripped the steering wheel, his jaw clenched. For Chris, the drive brought back memories he had buried long ago, the love he felt for Felicia, the bitterness of their last argument, and the emptiness he felt when she disappeared. Chris Benjamin's mind drifted back to that fateful night, the night his life had started to unravel. It had begun with a simple disagreement, the kind he and Felicia often had, but that night, things spiraled out of control. She had just shared unexpected news, she was pregnant. But Chris, overwhelmed with the pressure of building his restaurant empire, hadn't reacted the way he should have. You can't do this to me now, Felicia. I'm on the verge of something huge. I can't afford distractions, he had shouted, his frustration boiling over. Felicia had just stood there, her hand protectively resting on her stomach, eyes filled with hurt. Distractions, she whispered, her voice trembling. This is our child, Chris. How can you say that? Chris winced, feeling the weight of those words all over again. That was the last time he had seen her. She had stormed out of the house, and by the time he'd calmed down enough to realize his mistake and went looking for her, she was gone. No trace, no explanation, just gone. The memory clung to him, but Sarima's voice broke the silence, pulling him back to the present. What was she like, my mom? Chris blinked, glancing over at her. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond. How could he possibly capture who Felicia had been? She was more than just a memory, she was a presence he still felt every day. She was incredible, he began slowly, choosing his words carefully. Smart, funny, stubborn as anything. She could hold her own in any argument, always standing up for what she believed in. He smiled, a rare softening of his usually serious face. We had our differences, sure, but I loved her more than anything. Sarima listened quietly, absorbing every word. For so long, her mother had been a mystery, a distant figure she could only imagine from fragmented stories. But now, hearing Chris speak, it felt as if Felicia were coming to life before her. What happened between you two? She asked hesitantly, her curiosity getting the better of her. Chris sighed, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. I was an idiot, he admitted. I was so focused on my business, on making a name for myself, that I forgot what really mattered. When she told me she was pregnant, I didn't react well. I was scared. I thought it would ruin everything I'd worked for. He paused, his voice thick with regret. But I was wrong. I should have seen it as a chance to start a family with the woman I loved. Instead, I pushed her away. And then she was gone. Sarima felt her heart ache at the thought. She had never known her mother, but she could imagine the loneliness Felicia must have felt that night, the pain of leaving behind the man she loved. It was hard to imagine how different her life could have been if things had gone another way. As they approached the old house, Chris's stomach twisted in knots. The place had been abandoned for years, yet it still had a strange pull on him, as if the memories were carved into every corner. The house stood at the edge of a clearing, surrounded by overgrown grass and trees that seemed to press in from all sides. The paint was peeling, and the windows were clouded with dust, but it was still standing, just as it had been the night Felicia walked out. Sarima stepped out of the car, staring up at the house with a mix of awe and apprehension. This was where it had all begun, where her parents' love had bloomed and then shattered. She felt an odd sense of connection to the place, even though she had never set foot there before. Come on, Chris said, his voice softer now. Let's see if there's anything here that can help us. They walked up the creaking wooden steps, and Chris unlocked the door, which swung open with a rusty groan. Inside, the house was cold and empty, yet it felt as if the past still lingered in the air, waiting for them to uncover its secrets. Chris felt the weight of everything he had lost pressing down on him. This house had once been filled with love and hope. Now, it was just a shell, a reminder of everything that had slipped through his fingers. Sarima wandered into the living room, her fingers lightly brushing over the back of an old chair. This feels strange, she said softly, her voice echoing slightly in the empty space. Like I'm stepping into someone else's life. Chris stood in the doorway, watching her, his voice thick with emotion. This was our life. We had plans. We were supposed to get married, start a family. But everything fell apart. Sarima turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. She wasn't sure how to feel. She had always pictured her mother's past as something distant, untouchable. But now, standing here, in the very place where Felicia had once lived, it all felt incredibly real. And knowing that Chris was supposed to be a part of her life was overwhelming. They moved through the house in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Chris couldn't shake the memories that flooded his mind. He remembered the long nights he and Felicia had spent talking about their future, the plans they'd made to turn this house into a home. All of it had vanished the night she walked out. Why didn't you ever come back here? Sarima asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Chris stopped in the hallway, his gaze fixed on the faded wallpaper. I couldn't, he replied simply. After she disappeared, it was too painful. This house held too many memories. I thought if I stayed away, it would hurt less. Sarima nodded, though she couldn't fully understand. She had grown up without those memories, without the weight of that loss. But for Chris, it was clear that this place was more than just a house, it was a monument to everything he had lost. As they stepped into what used to be the bedroom, Chris Benjamin felt a wave of memories crashing over him. The bed, though covered in layers of dust, was still there, as if frozen in time. The closet doors hung slightly open, with empty hangers swaying gently. Chris hesitated, then walked over to a small drawer beside the bed. He opened it and found a few personal items, a necklace, a hairbrush, and some loose papers. Sarima stepped up behind him, glancing over his shoulder. Anything useful? She asked, a mix of curiosity and apprehension in her voice. Chris shook his head, But just as he was about to close the drawer, something caught his eye. In the corner, partially hidden beneath the papers, was a small envelope. His heart skipped a beat as he picked it up, turning it over to see his name written in familiar handwriting, Felicia's. With shaking hands, he opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. As he began to read, his chest tightened, and his breath grew shallow. The letter read, "Chris. If you're reading this, then I couldn't face you. I'm so sorry. I wanted to tell you everything, but I couldn't, not after what happened. You said things that night, things I know you didn't mean, but they hurt. I thought maybe I could stay, that we could work things out, but I was wrong. I need to leave, for both of us. There's something I didn't tell you, something I was too afraid to say. I'm pregnant, Chris. I found out recently and didn't know how to tell you. I know how important your career is, how much you've sacrificed. I didn't want to be the one to take that away from you. But this is our child, and I can't stay. I don't know what's going to happen from here, but I can't let you give up your dreams for me or for our baby. Maybe one day you'll understand, maybe you'll hate me for leaving, but please know, I never stopped loving you. Felicia." Chris's hands trembled, and tears blurred his vision. Felicia had been pregnant with his child all those years ago, and he'd had no idea. He had spent years believing she'd left because of a fight, because of him. But the truth was far more heartbreaking. She had left because she thought it was best for him. She was pregnant, Chris whispered, barely audible. She left because she thought I didn't want the baby. Sarima's eyes widened in shock. You mean, she left because of me? Chris nodded slowly, still staring at the letter, the words echoing in his mind. She was trying to protect me. She didn't want to be the reason I gave up my career. Sarima didn't know what to say. She had always believed her mother had passed away after living a quiet life. But now, everything she thought she knew was shattered. Her mother had been running, not from her father, but from the fear of holding him back. Chris wiped at his eyes, carefully folding the letter and slipping it into his pocket. We need to find her, he said, his voice stronger now. There's more to this. She didn't just disappear. I don't think she wanted to be found. Sarima frowned, puzzled. What do you mean? Chris looked at her, his eyes filled with determination. I think someone else was involved. Felicia wouldn't have just vanished without a trace. There's someone, who didn't want us to be together. A chill ran down Sarima's spine. Are you saying someone kept her away? Chris nodded, the pieces of the puzzle finally beginning to fall into place. Yes. Margaret was strong-willed. She wouldn't have stayed away unless something or someone forced her to. The letter had changed everything for Chris. The guilt he'd carried all these years, the belief that his ambition had driven Felicia away, had been replaced by a desperate need to uncover the truth. She hadn't left because of him, she'd left to protect him. But it had come at a terrible cost. As they drove back from the old house, the weight of these revelations filled the silence. Sarima stared out the window, trying to process everything. Felicia had always been a distant, mysterious figure in her mind, a memory she couldn't quite reach. But now, it was as if her mother's past was coming into focus, piece by piece. Do you think she ever planned to come back? Sarima asked quietly, breaking the silence. Chris kept his eyes on the road, his jaw clenched. I don't know, he admitted. But if she had come back, I would have been here. I would have waited. I didn't know about you, Sarima. I can't imagine how scared she must have been, but I would have done anything to make it right. Sarima nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of the letter he'd given her to hold. She had read it several times now, and each time she felt closer to understanding her mother. Felicia had been scared, conflicted, torn between her love for Chris and her fear of holding him back. But why didn't she come back? Sarima pressed. After all these years, she could have found you. She could have told you about me. Chris sighed, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. That's the part that doesn't make sense. There had to be more. Felicia wouldn't have stayed away without reason. If she didn't, someone must have kept her from coming back. Sarima's brow furrowed. You really think someone else was involved? Chris glanced at her, determination gleaming in his eyes. There's no other explanation. Felicia was strong. She wouldn't have just disappeared. Someone made sure she couldn't come back. And whoever that was, they've been hiding the truth for years. The car fell into a heavy silence again as they both pondered what this could mean. Sarima's mind raced with questions, each one more unsettling than the last. Who would have a reason to keep Felicia away? And why? When they finally reached Chris's home, the lights of the city glittered in the distance, but inside the car, the mood was still heavy. Chris parked and turned off the engine, but neither of them moved to get out. What do we do now? Sarima asked, her voice soft but steady. Chris turned to face her, his expression resolute. We find her. Wherever she is, we'll find her. And we'll uncover the truth about what really happened. Sarima nodded, a mixture of fear and hope swirling inside her. For the first time in her life, she felt connected to her past, a father who wanted to know her and a mother who had sacrificed everything to protect them both. But with this connection came the weight of so many unanswered questions. As they stepped out of the car, Sarima felt the world around her shift. She didn't know if they would ever truly find Felicia, but she knew one thing: together, she and Chris would keep searching. They were no longer bound by the shadows of the past. They were bound by the hope of discovering the truth. And that hope was more powerful than any secret. Chris Benjamin's phone buzzed in his hand, pulling him from his thoughts. He glanced at the screen and frowned. It was an unknown number. Normally, he would have ignored it, but something about this call felt different. Reluctantly, he answered. Hello, he said, his voice cautious. There was a pause on the other end, then a deep, gravelly voice spoke. Chris Benjamin.
Chris stiffened. Who's asking? The voice chuckled darkly. I hear you've been digging into the past. That's dangerous, you know. Chris's heart skipped a beat. Who the hell is this? Someone who knows things, the voice replied, cryptic. Things you might not want to know. But since you've started looking, maybe it's time you found out the truth. Chris's grip on the phone tightened. What are you talking about? There was a moment of silence before the voice spoke again. Meet me tomorrow night, 9 p.m., at the old pier. You'll get your answer. But be careful. Some truths are better left buried. Before Chris could respond, the line went dead. He stood there, processing the call, when he noticed Sarima watching him with concern. What was that about? She asked, sensing his tension. Chris lowered the phone, his mind racing. Someone knows something, he said, his voice low. They want to meet me tomorrow at the old pier. Sarima's eyes widened. Do you think it's about Mom? Chris nodded grimly. It has to be. Someone knows what happened to her, and they're ready to talk. But what if it's dangerous? Sarima's voice was laced with worry. Chris met her gaze, his expression serious. It might be. But we don't have a choice. We need answers. The next day felt agonizingly slow. Chris could barely focus, his mind replaying the call over and over. Who was this mysterious person? Could he trust them? And, more importantly, what did they know about Felicia? As night fell, Chris stood by the door, ready to leave when Sarima appeared at the bottom of the stairs. I'm coming with you, she said firmly. Chris shook his head. It's too dangerous, Sarima. I don't know what we're walking into. Sarima crossed her arms, her gaze unwavering. I don't care. This is about our family. I have a right to know the truth, too. Chris hesitated, torn between wanting to protect her and acknowledging that she deserved answers as much as he did. Finally, he nodded. All right. Let's go. They drove through the quiet, empty streets, the tension in the car growing with every passing mile. When they arrived at the pier, a sharp wind cut through the silence, and the old wooden planks creaked underfoot as they walked toward the meeting point. Chris scanned the area, his eyes darting to every shadow. Stay close, he whispered to Sarima, his voice barely audible. Just as they reached the end of the pier, a figure stepped out from the shadows, moving into the dim light of a nearby street lamp. Mr. Benjamin, the man said, his voice the same gravelly tone from the phone call. I'm glad you came. Chris narrowed his eyes, his body tense. He kept Sarima slightly behind him, not trusting the stranger but knowing that this meeting might be their only chance for answers. You said you had information, Chris said, his voice steady though his nerves were on edge. So talk. The man took a slow breath, his face hidden in the shadows. You've been looking for Felicia, he began, his tone slow and deliberate. I can tell you where she is. Sarima gasped, and Chris's heart raced, hope and fear mingling. Could this really be it? Could they finally learn the truth? Where is she? Chris demanded, his patience wearing thin. The man tilted his head, studying Chris. She's alive, he said flatly. But I'm sure you knew that already, didn't you? Chris's eyes flashed with a mixture of relief and anger. Felicia was alive. She hadn't simply disappeared or died, as he'd feared. But if she was alive, why hadn't she come back? Why had she stayed hidden? Where is she? Chris repeated, his voice rising with urgency. The man stepped closer, his face becoming clearer under the dim light. He was older, with deep lines etched into his weathered face and dark, calculating eyes that seemed to have seen too much. I'll tell you where she is, he said slowly, but you're not going to like the answer. Chris's fists clenched at his sides, frustration mounting. Stop playing games. Just tell me. The man gave a cold, humorless smile. She's in the mountains, he said. She's been living there for years. But she didn't just disappear on her own. Someone took her. Sarima's breath caught, and Chris's eyes widened in shock. Took her, he repeated, his mind racing. Who? Why? The man looked around, as if checking to make sure they were still alone. Your old business partner, Conrad, he said, his tone serious. He's the one who took her. Chris felt the ground drop from beneath him. Conrad, he repeated, disbelief filling his voice. Why would Conrad take her? The man's gaze sharpened, his voice blunt. He was jealous of you. You had the vision, the drive. He resented your success and thought taking Felicia would break you. Chris's hands clenched, memories of his years working with Conrad flooding his mind. They had built their business together, side by side, but tension had always simmered beneath the surface. Conrad had been ambitious, but Chris had never thought him capable of something so dark, kidnapping Felicia, keeping her hidden all these years. How do you know all this? Chris demanded, his voice low and dangerous. The man hesitated, his eyes flickering toward Sarima before returning to Chris. Because I was there, he said reluctantly. I worked for Conrad at the time. I didn't know what he was planning until it was too late. When I realized what he'd done, I couldn't go to the police. I knew too much. I had no choice but to disappear. Chris stared at him, his mind spinning. This man had been involved in the conspiracy to take Felicia. He'd known where she was all these years. Why are you telling me this now? Chris demanded, his voice trembling with anger. Why didn't you come forward sooner? The man's expression hardened. Because I didn't have a reason to. But now, I'm tired of running. I've lived with this secret too long, and I'm ready to end it. Chris was about to speak when Sarima's voice interrupted, trembling with emotion. Where is she? She asked, stepping out from behind Chris. Where is my mother? The man looked at her, a brief moment of compassion crossing his face. She's in a cabin in the mountains, he said. I'll give you the location. But understand this, Felicia, she doesn't remember everything. Conrad kept her isolated for years. She might not recognize you right away. Sarima's face paled, but she nodded, her determination unshaken. I don't care, she said firmly. We need to see her. Chris took a step closer to the man, his eyes burning with intensity. If you're lying. I'm not lying, the man interrupted, his voice cold and steady. I'm telling you the truth. Go to the cabin. You'll find her there. Chris stared at him, his mind racing with emotions he couldn't express. Felicia was alive. She had been taken from him, and now, after all these years, they were finally going to find her. Without another word, the man handed Chris a piece of paper with an address scrawled on it. Chris looked at the address, then back at the man. If this is real, he said quietly, I'll make sure Conrad pays for what he did.
The man didn't respond. He simply turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the pier, leaving Chris and Sarima standing there in stunned silence. Sarima looked up at Chris, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and hope. We're really going to find her, aren't we? She whispered. Chris nodded, his heart pounding. Yes, he said firmly. We're going to find her. The next morning, Chris, Benjamin, and Sarima set out for the mountains. The drive was long and tense, the landscape slowly transforming from the bustling cityscape to rugged, isolated wilderness. The cabin was hidden deep within the trees, far off the beaten path, exactly where the mysterious man had said it would be. As they approached the cabin, Chris's stomach twisted with nerves. The place was small, almost swallowed by the dense forest surrounding it, but it was there, just as described. He parked the car, and they stepped out, the silence of the mountains pressing in around them. Sarima's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the cabin. "Do you think she's really here?" she whispered. Chris didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the front door and knocked, his heart pounding with each passing second. For a long moment, there was nothing. No sound, no movement. Then, slowly, the door creaked open, and there she was. Felicia. She stood in the doorway, her face pale and gaunt, but unmistakably her. Chris felt his breath catch in his throat, unable to speak as he stared at her. Felicia's eyes darted between Chris and Sarima, confusion clouding her expression. For a moment, none of them moved, frozen in time. Finally, Felicia whispered, "Chris?" Chris felt as though the world had stopped. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but nothing had prepared him for the reality. She looked different, thinner, with lines of exhaustion etched into her face. Her once vibrant hair was streaked with gray, and her eyes held a weary sadness. But beneath all of it, it was still her. She was still the woman he had loved. "Felicia," he managed, his voice breaking slightly as he took a step toward her. "It's really you." Felicia didn't move at first. Her eyes flicked to Sarima, studying her for a long moment, something unreadable crossing her face. Who are you?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. Sarima swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. "I'm Sarima," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm your daughter." The words hung heavy in the air, loaded with years of separation and lost time. Felicia's face went even paler, her hand gripping the doorframe for support. "My daughter," she whispered, as if she couldn't believe it. "Yes," Sarima said, her voice shaking. "You left, but you had me. I spent my whole life wondering why. But I'm here now, and I need to know everything." Felicia's eyes filled with tears, and she reached out as if to touch Sarima's face, but her hand stopped, trembling in the air. I didn't know," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I didn't know how to find you." Chris, standing just behind Sarima, couldn't tear his eyes away from Felicia. He had so many questions, but seeing her fragile, haunted by years of pain, left him speechless. He waited, letting the weight of the moment settle. Slowly, Felicia stepped back, motioning for them to come inside. The cabin was small, barely furnished, with a simple bed in the corner and a few scattered chairs. It was clear she had been living in isolation for a long time. The air inside was cold, and a heavy silence filled the room, the kind that only years of solitude could create. Once inside, Felicia gestured for them to sit. Chris and Sarima took seats at a small table, but Felicia remained standing, her arms wrapped around herself as if to hold herself together. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way," she said, her voice trembling. "I wanted to come back. I tried, but I couldn't. They wouldn't let me." Chris leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Who wouldn't let you?" Felicia closed her eyes, taking a deep breath before opening them again, looking directly at him. "Conrad," she said, her voice steady now. "It was Conrad. He's the reason I disappeared." Chris's jaw clenched at the mention of his former business partner. "I know," he said quietly. "Someone told me he took you. But why? Why didn't you reach out? Why didn't you tell me?" Felicia lowered her gaze, tears sliding down her cheeks. "He threatened me," she whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. "After I left that night, after our fight, I was hurt and confused. I needed space, so I went to stay with a friend. But Conrad found me. He told me that if I ever tried to come back, he'd ruin you. He said he would destroy everything you worked for. Your business, your reputation. He knew things, Chris. Things that could take everything away from you. Chris felt his fists clench as he absorbed her words. That bastard, he muttered, rage simmering beneath the surface. The betrayal was incomprehensible. He had known Conrad was ambitious, but to go this far, to take Felicia and hold her hostage with threats, it was unforgivable. I didn't believe him at first, Felicia continued, her voice thick with emotion. But then he started sending me messages, reminding me he was always watching. I was scared, Chris. I thought by staying away, I was protecting you. Chris stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You should have told me, he said, anger and frustration evident in his tone. We could have fought him together. I would have protected you, Felicia. I would have done anything. Felicia shook her head, her face etched with sorrow. I was trying to protect you, she replied softly. I thought I was doing the right thing. But now, I see how wrong I was. Sarima, who had been silent, finally spoke up, her voice filled with pain. All this time, you were alive and you knew about me. Why didn't you come for me? Why did you let me grow up without you? Felicia's face crumpled, her voice breaking. I didn't know how, she whispered, the words thick with regret. After Conrad took me, he kept me isolated. He told me you were gone, that it was too late. I had no way of finding you. Tears filled Sarima's eyes as she shook her head, overwhelmed by years of abandonment and pain. I needed you, she said, her voice trembling. All this time, I needed you. Felicia took a hesitant step forward, her hands shaking. I'm so sorry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought I was doing what was best. I thought I was protecting you both. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. Chris watched the heartbreaking exchange, his heart aching for both of them. He had imagined a reunion filled with answers and relief, but now he understood that nothing could truly make up for the years of separation and pain. There were no easy solutions, no way to erase the hurt they had all endured. But one thing was clear, they had found Felicia. She was alive, and now, they had a chance to rebuild what had been lost. We can still make this right, Chris said, his voice steady but filled with determination. We're together now, and as for Conrad, he's going to pay for what he did. Felicia looked at him, fear flickering in her eyes. Chris, he's dangerous. If you go after him. I don't care, Chris interrupted, his voice hard. He took everything from us, and now, he has to face the consequences. The drive back from the cabin was heavy with silence, each of them lost in their thoughts. Chris's mind churned with plans, each one focused on bringing Conrad to justice for his years of manipulation and threats. Felicia had been held captive all these years, not by chains but by the emotional control Conrad had wielded. The thought of it made Chris's blood boil. He would stop at nothing to make sure Conrad paid for what he'd done. Next to him, Sarima sat quietly, staring out the window. In the past few days, she had uncovered a past she never knew existed and reunited with a mother she thought was lost forever. But instead of feeling relief, there was an undeniable anger building inside her. How could her mother have let this happen? How could she have let Conrad win? I don't understand why she didn't fight harder, Sarima said softly, almost as if talking to herself rather than to Chris. Chris glanced at her, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. Felicia did what she thought was right. She was scared. Conrad had a lot of power back then. He knew things about me, about the business, that could have destroyed everything. She thought she was protecting us. Sarima shook her head, frustration evident on her face. But what about me? Didn't she think about what it would be like for me to grow up without a mother? Didn't she care? Chris sighed, feeling the weight of her words. He didn't have the answer she was looking for, but he tried to convey some comfort. She cared, Sarima. I know she did. But fear can make people do things they wouldn't normally do. It makes you believe you're doing the right thing, when in reality, you're just running. Sarima didn't respond, her eyes focused on the road ahead. She wanted to believe Chris, but the years of hurt were hard to let go of. Reconciling the image of her mother, someone she had idolized in her absence, with the reality of what had happened was difficult. But now, more than anything, she wanted answers. As they approached the city, Chris's phone buzzed from the center console. He glanced at the screen, and his heart skipped a beat. It was an unfamiliar number, just like the call from the man who had led them to the cabin. Chris hesitated, then picked it up and answered. "Chris Benjamin," he said cautiously. "Chris," the voice replied, low and gravelly. It was the same man as before. "You found her, didn't you?" Chris's jaw tightened. "Yes, I did. And now I need to know everything. Why did Conrad do this? Why did he take her?" There was a brief silence before the man spoke again. "It wasn't just about jealousy. There's more to it than that." Chris frowned, gripping the phone tighter. "What are you talking about?" The man's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Conrad had a plan. Taking Felicia was only part of it. But there's something you don't know. Something Felicia doesn't even know." Chris felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you saying?" "Felicia was never supposed to stay gone forever," the man continued. "Conrad didn't just want to ruin your life, he wanted to take over everything. Your business, your family. And the best way he saw to do that was to get Felicia out of the picture temporarily." Chris's heart raced. "What do you mean, temporarily?" The man hesitated before speaking. "Conrad's plan was to bring her back after he'd gained enough power in the company and made sure you couldn't fight him. He was going to bring her back, but only after breaking her down, making her dependent on him. She would think you were the one who abandoned her." Chris felt sick. The idea that Conrad had orchestrated all of this, that he had planned to manipulate not only him but also Felicia, was almost too much to bear. "Why?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Why would he go to such lengths?" The man's voice turned cold. "Because he loved her. Conrad was obsessed with Felicia. He couldn't stand that she was with you. So he set out to destroy you and take her for himself. But when she got pregnant, everything changed. His plan fell apart, and he had to improvise. That's when he made her disappear. For good." Chris's mind reeled with the weight of the revelation. Conrad had been in love with Felicia the entire time, and everything, the kidnapping, the threats, the years of separation, had been part of a twisted plan to make her his. "He's a monster," Chris muttered under his breath. "You're not wrong," the man replied. "But you need to be careful. Conrad is dangerous, and now that you're getting close to the truth, he won't hesitate to stop you." Chris clenched his teeth, anger building inside him. "I don't care. He's going to pay for what he did. To Felicia, to all of us." "There's more," the man added, his voice lowering. "Conrad isn't working alone. He has people in the company, people you don't even know about, helping him keep control. If you're going after him, you need to be smart. Trust no one." Chris's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Tell me everything. I want to know exactly what we're dealing with." The man hesitated one last time. "Meet me tomorrow, same place as before. I'll give you the full story. But be careful, Chris. Conrad's not going to let this go without a fight." The call ended abruptly, leaving Chris staring at the phone, his mind spinning. He turned to Sarima, who had been listening to his side of the conversation with growing concern. "What was that about?" she asked, worry clear in her voice. Chris took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions inside him. "Conrad," he said quietly, "it's worse than we thought. He didn't just want to ruin me, he wanted everything. And now that we're close to the truth." Sarima's eyes widened. "What are we going to do?" Chris looked at her, his expression hardening with determination. "We're going to finish this, once and for all." The next day arrived quickly, and Chris felt the weight of what was to come pressing heavily on him. He and Sarima prepared to meet the mysterious informant again, knowing that this time, the stakes were even higher. Conrad had gone to unimaginable lengths to destroy their lives, but now Chris had the chance to take everything back. As they drove to the meeting point, Chris couldn't help but think about Felicia. She was safe now, back in the cabin, but the scars of what had happened would never fully heal. He owed it to her and to Sarima to end this nightmare and make Conrad pay for what he had done. When they arrived at the pier, the air was thick with anticipation. The same gravelly-voiced man stood waiting for them in the shadows, his posture tense. Chris and Sarima approached cautiously, ready for whatever might come. But as they drew closer, a realization hit Chris like a punch to the gut. Something was wrong. The man's expression wasn't just tense, it was terrified. "You're too late," the man said, his voice trembling. "Conrad knows. He's coming for you." Chris's pulse quickened, his mind racing to process the words. "What do you mean, he knows?" he demanded, his voice sharp. The man glanced around nervously, his eyes darting to every shadow. "Conrad has eyes everywhere. I thought I could get you the information before he figured it out, but he's ahead of us. He knows you found Felicia. He knows you're looking for answers, and now he's moving fast. If you don't act now, he'll make sure you disappear. Just like he did with Felicia." Chris Benjamin's fists clenched tightly at his sides, a surge of anger rising within him like a wave. He had waited too long for this moment, too long to see justice served. Conrad had stolen everything from him, his future, his family, and now he was threatening to take even more. "Where is he?" Chris demanded, his voice hard as steel. "Where is Conrad?" The informant hesitated, his eyes darting between Chris and Sarima. "I don't know exactly. He's been keeping a low profile since you started poking around. But if I had to guess, he's at the estate. That's where he's always had his most loyal people. They'll protect him. It's like a fortress." Chris's jaw tightened. Of course, the estate. Conrad had always used that place as a symbol of his power and wealth, but now it was more than that. It was a hiding place, a sanctuary where he could continue his schemes without fear of being caught. But Chris wasn't going to let him get away this time. "We're going to the estate," Chris said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Sarima's grip tightened on his arm. "Are you sure? What if it's a trap?" Chris met her gaze, his expression softening slightly. He knew the risks. He knew that confronting Conrad on his own turf was dangerous. But he also knew they didn't have a choice. "We don't have a choice, Sarima," he said quietly. "He's not going to stop until we make him. If we don't end this now, he'll come after us. After you, after your mother." Sarima swallowed hard, her fear evident, but she nodded. She knew Chris was right. Conrad wasn't just a threat. They were running out of time. The informant handed Chris a set of coordinates and a key card. "This will get you through the outer gates, but once you're inside, you're on your own. Conrad has guards. They'll be armed." Chris took the key card, his face set in grim determination. "We'll be ready." The drive to the estate was tense and silent, the weight of what was to come pressing down on them. Chris kept his focus on the road, but his mind was racing with 1,000 possibilities. What would he find when they got there? How many people would Conrad have waiting for them? And most importantly, how was he going to protect Sarima in the middle of what was sure to be a dangerous confrontation? Sarima sat beside him, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She was scared, more scared than she had ever been in her life, but she refused to show it. She had spent so many years wondering about her past, longing for answers, and now that she was on the brink of discovering the full truth, she wasn't about to back down. She had to see this through, no matter what. As they approached the estate, Chris slowed the car, his eyes scanning the massive gates that loomed ahead. The property was surrounded by high walls and thick trees, designed to keep intruders out and secrets in. The security was tight, but Chris had the key card. He pulled up to the gate, swiped the card, and waited as it slowly creaked open. "This is it," Chris muttered, his eyes narrowing. He drove through the gates, his heart pounding with adrenaline. The estate stretched out before them, a vast expanse of manicured lawns and towering trees, with the main house looming in the distance like a fortress. It was eerily quiet, too quiet, and Chris could feel the tension building with every step they took closer to the house. As they parked and stepped out of the car, Chris turned to Sarima, his expression serious. "Stay close to me. No matter what happens, don't leave my side." Sarima nodded, barely containing her fear as she followed him toward the entrance of the house, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The front door was locked, but Chris wasn't surprised. He knew Conrad would have the place locked down. Glancing around, he spotted a side door leading to the servants' quarters and motioned for Sarima to follow. They slipped through the side entrance, entering a dark, quiet hallway. They moved cautiously, the tension growing with every step. The air was thick with the sense that something was about to happen, and Chris's instincts were on high alert. He knew Conrad was here somewhere, watching, waiting. As they reached the main foyer, they heard footsteps. Chris froze, motioning for Sarima to stay behind him. The sound grew louder, closer, until a figure appeared at the top of the grand staircase. It was Conrad. He stood there, looking down at them with a smug smile on his face, as if he had been expecting them all along. His eyes were cold and calculating, and Chris could feel the weight of his presence like a dark cloud. "Well, well," Conrad said, his voice smooth and taunting. "I have to admit, Chris, I didn't think you'd come this far. I suppose I underestimated your stubbornness." Chris's jaw clenched, his anger simmering just below the surface. "It's over, Conrad. We know everything. You can't hide anymore." Conrad chuckled, taking a slow step down the stairs. "Hide? Oh, Chris, I think you're mistaken. I'm not hiding. I'm right here, exactly where I've always been. And you, well, you're just as predictable as ever. Always so quick to charge in without thinking." Chris took a step forward, his fists clenched. "You ruined my life, Conrad. You took Felicia from me, kept her hidden for years, manipulating her, threatening her. And for what? Because you were jealous? Because you wanted to take everything I had." Conrad's smile faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Jealous? Oh, Chris, you really don't understand, do you? This was never about jealousy. It was about power, control. You had something I wanted, and I took it. Simple as that." Sarima stepped forward, her voice shaking with anger. "You didn't just take him. You took my mother. You destroyed our family." Conrad's gaze shifted to Sarima, and for a brief moment, his expression softened. "Ah, the daughter. I wondered when you'd show up. You know, Sarima, your mother never stopped thinking about you, even when she was with me." Chris felt a surge of rage. "Shut up," he growled. "You have no right to talk about her." Conrad's smile widened, mocking. "Oh, but I do, Chris. Because I'm the one who's still in control here. You see, I've got people watching, waiting for my signal. One wrong move, and everything you care about will be gone." Just like that. Chris stared at him, his mind racing. Conrad had always been 2 steps ahead, always one move away from total destruction. But this time, Chris wasn't going to let him win. "You're wrong, Conrad," Chris said, his voice steady. "This time, you're the one who's lost." Chris's words cut through the tension like a blade. Conrad stood frozen for a moment, his smug smile faltering as he took in Chris's defiant stance. The weight of years of manipulation, deception, and destruction pressed down on the room, but for the first time, Conrad's control seemed to waver. Chris advanced toward him, his voice low and full of conviction. "This ends here. You've taken too much from me, from Felicia, from Sarima. I've spent years letting you pull the strings, letting you think you were invincible. But you're just a coward, hiding behind threats and lies. And now, it's over." Conrad sneered, but a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "You think you're some kind of hero, Chris? That you can just waltz in here and change everything? I own this world. I built it. Chris took another step forward, his gaze unwavering. You didn't build anything, Conrad. You stole. You took from others because you didn't have the strength to create something real. But your time is up. Everything you've done is coming to light. Sarima moved beside Chris, her voice filled with fierce determination. And we're not afraid of you anymore. Conrad looked between them, his facade cracking. You can't win this. I still have power. I still have people on my side. Chris shook his head. Not anymore. We have the evidence, the names, the files. It's over, Conrad. You're finished. A tense silence filled the room, the weight of their words hanging in the air. Conrad's face twisted with rage and desperation, but he could see the resolve in their eyes, the realization that he had lost. And as Chris and Sarima stood there, united and unafraid, Conrad's power crumbled around him. You think you've won? Conrad sneered, stepping slowly down the staircase. You think you can walk into my house, throw around accusations, and everything will magically fall into place? Chris didn't flinch, his eyes steely and unwavering. I don't think I've won. I know I have. Your game is over, Conrad. Behind him, Sarima stood tense, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the energy in the room shift, as though something was about to break. Her father had faced down Conrad, exposed the lies that had kept their family apart for so long, and yet, standing here in the cold grand foyer of the estate, the stakes felt higher than ever. Conrad's lips twisted into a bitter smile. You don't get it, do you? He said, his voice dripping with malice. This wasn't just about taking Felicia from you. This was about making sure you would never have anything. I wanted to watch you fall apart piece by piece while I stood by and took everything. Chris's fists tightened, his anger dangerously close to boiling over. You took everything from me, he growled. You kept Felicia away from her family. You made her live in fear. You stole years from us. Years we will never get back. Conrad's eyes gleamed with twisted satisfaction. And I'd do it all again, he said, his voice filled with venom. Because I enjoyed watching you suffer, knowing there was nothing you could do to stop me. Chris took a step forward, but Sarima quickly moved to stand beside him, placing a hand on his arm. She could feel the fury radiating from him and knew that Conrad was trying to provoke him, to push him over the edge. Don't, Sarima whispered urgently. He's not worth it. Conrad's eyes shifted to Sarima, his expression shifting slightly as he regarded her with a calculating gaze. You know, Sarima, he said with a smirk, you're more like me than you realize. Strong, determined. If things had gone differently, you would have been proud to call me a mentor. Sarima recoiled, her face contorting in disgust. You're nothing like me, she spat. I'll never be anything like you. Conrad's smile wavered, but he quickly recovered, shrugging nonchalantly. Suit yourself, he said, his tone dismissive. But remember, no matter what you think, no matter how hard you try, you'll never undo what's been done. Your family will always carry the scars I left behind. Chris couldn't take it anymore. He stepped forward, his voice low and menacing. This is your last chance, Conrad. Walk away now, and maybe you'll get out of this with something. But if you keep pushing, you'll lose everything. Conrad's laugh echoed through the room, cold and hollow. You don't scare me, Chris. You never did. Just as the words left his mouth, the sound of footsteps echoed from the back of the house. Chris and Sarima both turned toward the noise, their bodies tensing in anticipation. Conrad's expression changed, a flicker of unease crossing his face. The footsteps grew louder, and then, from the shadows, a group of men appeared, dressed in black, clearly armed, with faces set in hard, determined lines. They marched forward with precision, stopping a few feet behind Conrad. Chris's heart sank. This was Conrad's final play, his last-ditch effort to maintain control. He had called in reinforcements, hired muscle to end this confrontation on his terms. I told you, Chris, Conrad said smugly. You'll never win. I always have the upper hand. Sarima's breath hitched as she looked at the men standing behind Conrad. This was bad, worse than she had imagined. They were outnumbered, and Conrad seemed ready to escalate things. She glanced at Chris, searching his face for some kind of plan. But then, something unexpected happened. The leader of the group, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward. He eyed Conrad with disdain before speaking in a low, commanding voice. You're done, Conrad. Conrad blinked, confusion flashing across his face. What? The man crossed his arms, his expression stern and unyielding. We've been watching you for a long time, waiting for you to slip up. Now that you have, it's over. Conrad's eyes widened in shock. What are you talking about? I hired you. The man shook his head. Not anymore. You're under arrest. Before Conrad could react, two of the men stepped forward, pulling his arms behind his back and slapping handcuffs on his wrists. Conrad struggled, his face turning red with rage and disbelief. What is this? He shouted. You can't do this. I'm in control here. But the men ignored him, dragging him down the stairs as he continued to shout. This isn't over, Chris. Conrad screamed, his voice echoing through the hall. I'll destroy you. I'll destroy everything you love. Chris stood still, his chest heaving with adrenaline as he watched Conrad being taken away. Sarima tightened her grip on his arm, her eyes wide with shock and relief. What just happened? She whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. Chris exhaled slowly, his body finally relaxing as the weight of everything began to lift. I don't know, he admitted, but it looks like someone's been keeping an eye on Conrad. The leader of the group turned to face Chris and Sarima, his expression calm and professional. We've been investigating Conrad for a long time, he explained. He's been involved in illegal activities for years, blackmail, extortion, you name it. We had enough evidence to take him down, but we needed to catch him in the act. Your investigation into Felicia's disappearance was the final piece we needed. Sarima's mouth fell open in shock. So, you knew. The man nodded. We've been monitoring him closely. When we saw he was making moves against you and your family, we knew it was time to act. Chris felt a surge of relief flood through him. After all these years, after everything Conrad had done, justice was finally being served. The monster who had torn his life apart was finally being held accountable. Thank you, Chris said, his voice filled with gratitude. The man nodded once more. We'll make sure Conrad never hurts anyone again. With that, the group escorted Conrad out of the house, his shouts of anger fading into the distance. Chris and Sarima stood there in stunned silence, letting the reality of what had just happened sink in. It's over, Sarima whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. It's really over. Chris turned to her, a mixture of relief and sadness in his eyes. Yeah, he said softly. It's over. The days that followed Conrad's arrest felt surreal. For so long, Chris had lived under the weight of what Conrad had done, the constant shadow of betrayal and loss hanging over him. Now, with Conrad finally gone, that shadow had lifted. But even with Conrad out of their lives, there was still a sense of unresolved emotion lingering in the air, particularly for Felicia, who had endured so much, and for Sarima, who was still processing the reunion with her mother. Chris Benjamin stood on the balcony of his home, staring out at the city skyline as the early morning light filtered through the buildings. He hadn't slept much since Conrad's downfall, his mind racing with everything that had happened. Thoughts of Felicia, safe now but still healing from years of manipulation, filled his mind. And then there was Sarima, his daughter, who had been through so much more than any daughter should have to endure. For the first time in years, Chris allowed himself to think about the future. The chaos had ended, but rebuilding their lives would take time and patience. As he stood there, lost in thought, he heard footsteps behind him. Turning, he saw Sarima standing in the doorway, wrapped in a sweater to shield herself from the crisp morning air. Hey, she said softly, stepping onto the balcony beside him. "Hey," Chris replied, offering her a small smile. "How are you feeling?" Sarima shrugged, leaning against the railing and looking out at the horizon. "I don't know," she admitted. "It still doesn't feel real, you know? Everything happened so fast." Chris nodded, understanding. "Yeah, it's a lot to take in." They stood in silence for a while, the quiet between them comfortable yet heavy with unspoken emotions. Finally, Sarima turned to face him, a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Chris took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "We move forward," he said. "One step at a time. We have a lot of healing to do, especially your mom. But we're together now, and that's what matters." Sarima looked down at her hands, her expression troubled. "Do you think she'll ever be okay, after everything?" Chris sighed, leaning his elbows on the railing as he looked out over the city. "It's going to take time," he replied honestly. "She's been through a lot, but she's strong. And she has us. We'll help her through it." Sarima nodded, though she still looked uncertain. I don't know how to feel about her. I spent my whole life wondering, missing her, and now that she's back, it's like, I don't really know who she is anymore." Chris understood. He had felt the same way. In many ways, the Felicia they had found was not the same woman who had disappeared all those years ago. She had been changed by her experiences, molded by the fear and isolation that Conrad had inflicted on her. But beneath it all, he believed she was still Felicia, the woman he had loved. "It'll take time to get to know her again," Chris said gently. "But I believe that, underneath everything, she's still the same person. She's still your mom, and she loves you." Tears filled Sarima's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. "I just wish she had come back sooner. I wish she had fought harder." Chris placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We can't change the past," he said softly. "But we can decide what to do with the future. And given the chance, I know she'll fight for you now. She's here. That's what matters." Sarima's gaze softened, and she nodded. "You're right," she said quietly. "It's just hard to let go of all the years we lost." Chris didn't have an answer for that. He understood the pain of lost time all too well. But he also knew that dwelling on the past wouldn't help them move forward. They had been given a second chance. A chance to rebuild, to heal, to find some semblance of peace. And that was what they needed to focus on now. Later that afternoon, Chris and Sarima drove out to the cabin to visit Felicia. She had been staying there since Conrad's arrest, taking the time she needed to recover emotionally and physically from everything she had endured. The cabin was quiet, peaceful, and far removed from the chaos of the city. Chris thought it was exactly what she needed. As they approached the cabin, Chris noticed how much calmer Felicia seemed. She was still fragile, still carrying the weight of the past, but there was a lightness to her that hadn't been there before. Felicia greeted her face softening into a gentle smile when she saw them. "I'm glad you came," she said quietly, her voice softer than it had been in the past. Sarima offered a hesitant smile in return, though Chris could sense the nervousness lingering beneath the surface. Rebuilding a relationship after so many years of separation was new for both of them. They were taking small, cautious steps forward, each one filled with a mix of hope and uncertainty. They settled into the small living room, the atmosphere warm but slightly awkward. Conversation flowed slowly at first, each of them unsure how to bridge the gaps left by years apart. But as time passed, they began to talk more freely. Felicia opened up about her years in hiding, sharing small moments of hope she had clung to during dark times. She spoke of the guilt she had carried, the fear that kept her away, and the manipulation that Conrad had used to make her believe she was doing the right thing by staying away. "I didn't know what else to do," Felicia admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "I thought I was protecting you both. But now, I see that I was just running, and I'm so sorry for that." Sarima reached out, placing her hand gently over Felicia's. "I understand," she said softly. "I don't blame you. I'm glad you're here now." Felicia's eyes filled with tears as she squeezed Sarima's hand tightly. "I'm going to make it up to you," she whispered. "I promise, I'm going to be the mother you deserve." Chris watched the exchange, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and relief. For the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. They had been through so much pain, so much separation, but they were finally moving forward. As the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the cabin, Chris stood by the window, watching the light dance across the trees. 4 years, he had focused on the past, on everything he had lost. But now, standing there with the two people who mattered most to him, he realized that the future was what truly mattered. Felicia and Sarima joined him by the window, and the three of them stood side by side, watching the fading light. They didn't need words. The silence was filled with a shared understanding, a quiet promise that they would face whatever lay ahead together. They were a family, finally united. And though they couldn't change the years they had lost, they had a chance to start fresh, to build new memories and heal old wounds. Together, they would create a future filled with love, resilience, and a newfound strength that no one could take from them. It was a new beginning, one they would cherish, one they had fought so hard to earn. If you're still here, it means you're enjoying the story. Go ahead and generously hit that like button and subscribe for more captivating tales like this. We'd love to hear from you. What lessons have you learned from this story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next story.